Caleb Whitmore hadn't taken a single step in 7 years. Then on a quiet Tuesday morning, something would happen that no one in the Whitmore family, or their long list of specialists, could explain. But before that day arrived, life inside the white-pillared estate rolled on like it always had, orderly, quiet, and painfully predictable. Richard Whitmore, who believed in plans, credentials, and measurable results, had no idea that the person about to change his son's life didn't carry a degree, wear a lab coat, or have any interest in therapy manuals. She would arrive with a single battered suitcase, a stack of old records, and a way of noticing people that made them feel both seen and safe. Morning light spilled through the tall windows of the Whitmore estate's east wing, painting the polished hardwood floors in long strips of gold. The place was quiet, too quiet for a house this size. Most mornings were like that. The hum of the fridge in the kitchen, the distant tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, and the occasional groan of the old staircase were the only sounds. Even the family dog had learned not to bark. Richard sat in his home office, the kind of room that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread. Dark mahogany desk, shelves lined with first-edition books he rarely opened, and a view of the back lawn that stretched all the way to the line of oaks near the river. His laptop chimed every few seconds with incoming emails. He ignored most of them. For months, his calendar had been stacked with meetings, investor calls, and fundraisers. But the truth, one he rarely admitted even to himself, was that none of it mattered as much as what he couldn't fix: his son. Caleb had been born healthy, the kind of baby nurses cooed over. But just before his second birthday, a rare neurological disorder began stealing his mobility. Doctors couldn't agree on a clear prognosis. Some said he might walk with assistance someday. Others said he never would. By the time he was 4, the possibility of independent walking had faded into something Richard didn't dare hope for anymore. And the silence, that was harder. Caleb wasn't mute, but he spoke so little that whole days went by without him saying more than a word or two. He didn't cry when he scraped his knee, didn't laugh when the dog rolled over for a belly rub, didn't yell when Richard accidentally spilled hot coffee on his own hand, and cursed loud enough to echo through the hall. It was as if Caleb lived behind glass, present, watching, but unreachable. That winter, their longtime housekeeper, Mrs. Elma, announced she was retiring. She'd been with the Whitmores since before Caleb was born, knew the rhythms of the house better than anyone. Richard tried to convince her to stay, even offered to double her salary, but she smiled in that way older women sometimes do when they've already decided. "Sir, I'm too old to keep up with this place," she told him, folding a set of towels with precise corners. "But I know someone who could." Richard almost declined before she finished the sentence. He hated change, especially when it involved the few constants Caleb had. But Elma insisted. "She's not fancy," she said, "but she's got heart. Her name's Loretta Miles, from Macon, Georgia. Raised 2 boys on her own, knows how to keep a house in order." Richard's mind snagged on those first 3 words. She's not fancy. He needed order, not heart. Still, with Elma leaving, he didn't have many options. Loretta arrived on a drizzly Monday afternoon in early March. A taxi dropped her at the end of the long gravel drive. She stepped out wearing a faded blue coat, a scarf knotted over her hair, and house shoes that looked soft from years of wear. In one hand, she carried a medium suitcase. In the other, a milk crate filled with vinyl records, their paper sleeves worn and frayed. Sandra Lee, Richard's assistant, met her at the door. "Mr. Whitmore's in his office," she said, voice brisk but not unkind. "Come in, I'll show you your room." Loretta stepped into the foyer and looked up at the chandelier overhead, not with awe, but like she was measuring the space. She moved slowly, her eyes catching on family photos in silver frames, the heavy runner on the staircase, the bowl of polished apples on the hall table. Caleb sat in his wheelchair at the far end of the hall, half hidden in the doorway to the den. His eyes followed her, steady, unblinking. Loretta noticed. "You don't have to talk to me, baby," she said, her voice low and warm. "I'll just talk to you." "My title, Mama." It was the first thing she said in the house. For the next hour, she unpacked in the small upstairs room near the back of the house. The space had a narrow bed, a dresser, and a window overlooking the side yard. She placed her crate of records under the window, next to a small photo frame holding 2 boys, both smiling wide, one older, one maybe 7. That night she cooked her first dinner for the Whitmores: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans with bacon. Richard ate quickly, barely speaking. Caleb pushed his food around but ate half his potatoes. Loretta didn't press. She just told a story about the time her youngest son tried to fry bacon with an iron. Richard didn't laugh. Caleb's lips twitched, just barely. Loretta noticed. The next morning the house felt different in a way Richard couldn't put his finger on. Loretta moved through the rooms humming under her breath. Not loud enough to interrupt phone calls, just enough to fill the air. She dusted, mopped, and rearranged the pantry so that Caleb's favorite cereal sat on the lowest shelf. When she passed Caleb in the hallway, she didn't stop to ask questions he wouldn't answer. She just said, "Morning, baby," and kept walking. By the third day, she had found the record player in the corner of the living room. It was more decorative than functional. Richard hadn't used it in years. Loretta ran a dust cloth over it, then set one of her records on the turntable. The crackle came first, then the slow, warm voice of Sam Cooke filled the room. Caleb, sitting by the doorway, watched as she wiped the coffee table, swaying gently to the rhythm. She didn't look at him. Not yet. That evening, Richard sat at his desk, staring out the window, when Sandra appeared in the doorway. "Your new hire's different," she said. Richard didn't look up. "Different how?" "She talks to him," Sandra replied. "She's supposed to," Richard said flatly. "Not like that." Sandra shook her head. "Like she's not expecting him to answer, but she still believes he will." Richard didn't respond, but later that night, as he passed the living room, he saw Caleb sitting a little closer to the record player than before. Loretta was in the kitchen, singing softly while she washed dishes. Upstairs, Caleb lay in bed, eyes open in the dark. He could still hear the faint echo of Sam Cooke in his head, the way Loretta had moved like the music was part of her. He didn't know why, but he whispered something, so quietly he wasn't sure it counted as saying it at all. Maybe tomorrow. Loretta didn't try to make Caleb talk. She just started talking to him. The Tuesday after she arrived, Westport woke to a soft salt smell rolling in from the sound and the kind of thin sunlight that made you think the day might behave itself. In the Whitmore kitchen, the fridge screen flashed a cheerful "good morning" and suggested a breakfast bowl recipe no one asked for. Loretta shook her head at it like at a chatty neighbor and reached for the cast-iron skillet that lived under the counter. She moved the way a person moves when they've worked in a dozen different kitchens, taking inventory by touch, reading a drawer by the weight of the spoons. "Morning, baby," she said, not turning around. The wheels had whispered a greeting before any words could. Caleb had eased to his usual place at the end of the island, a spot with a view of everything and a commitment to nothing. "You hungry for oatmeal or eggs?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Loretta already had the oats in a saucepan, the milk warming with a pinch of salt, cinnamon measured into the curve of her palm. She split a banana, sliced it on the bias the way short-order cooks did when they wanted food to look like more than it was, and set the slices aside. The coffee maker sputtered to life, fragrant and bossy. She poured a splash of cream in first because she liked to see the color bloom. "Back home," she said, "my sister keeps a window cracked while she cooks so the house don't get to smelling like onions all day. She swears it keeps her neighbors friendly. I told her folks will be friendly if you feed 'em." Nothing from Caleb, not even the tilt of his head. That was all right. She stirred the oats slow enough to keep them from sticking, fast enough to keep them from clumping. The radio voice of the fridge offered to order more cinnamon. Loretta clicked it off with one knuckle, and the kitchen went back to being a place for one conversation at a time. The first tiny sound belonged to Caleb's fingers. Resting on his lap, they tapped, barely there, like a moth against a lampshade. Loretta didn't look. She checked the pantry instead, pleased that the cereal had stayed where she'd put it on the lower shelf. "You like your toast in triangles, right?" she asked the room. "Triangles make a thing taste better. I don't know why that is. It just is." The toast popped. She buttered it to the very edges and lined it side by side on a small plate, triangles pointing the same direction as if heading somewhere on purpose. She spooned oatmeal into a bowl, set the banana on top like a little campfire, and dusted cinnamon just enough so the first bite would be warm without being bossy. She placed the bowl in front of him and slid the toast to the right, a practice placement that told him she noticed how he liked to reach. "Bon appétit," she said lightly. That's French for eat up before it gets lonely. He took the spoon because habit sometimes borrowed the shape of choice. The first bite went cautious, as if oatmeal might behave different today. The second went easier. Loretta sipped her coffee and leaned a hip against the counter, telling him about makin' mornings at the diner, where she worked double shifts once upon a time. "You ever been in a place where the floor knows everybody's footsteps?" she asked. "I could tell Mr. Bernard from his cane and Ms. Alma from her little church shoes. Regulars hold a place together same as beams do, and you better believe you refill their coffee before they ask, 'cause that's how you say I see you without making a fuss." Caleb's eyes tracked the steam rising off his bowl. When the steam thinned, he took another bite. Loretta watched the way his left hand hovered after each lift of the spoon, indecision turning into pause, pause turning into rhythm. She filed the rhythm away in that mental drawer where she kept measurements and names and small clues that add up to something later. Sandra arrived at 9 with a folder tucked under her arm and a ponytail tight enough to make a point. She nodded at Caleb, said, "Morning," got a blink in return, then angled toward the coffee. "How's our first full week going?" she asked Loretta. "Going," Loretta said. "Houses tell you what they need if you listen." Sandra smiled, but her eyes carried a ledger. "Richard likes structure," she said. "Success metrics. It helps him, well, it helps. Structure's fine." Loretta rinsed the saucepan and left it upside down to dry. "So is kindness." Sandra stirred sugar into her coffee. "Just so you know, if you need supplies, text me. We keep backups of everything in the pool house. And for the record," she hesitated, the words choosing themselves, "Caleb's therapists over the years were good people. It's not that we didn't try." "I don't doubt it," Loretta said. "Trying's not the same as seeing, but they're cousins." She wiped the counter in long, even strokes. "I talk. If he wants to meet me halfway, he will." Sandra studied her a second longer, like a person trying to decide if a recipe would work in her own kitchen. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll be in the office." She touched Caleb's shoulder as she passed. He didn't flinch. That counted as something. After breakfast, the day unfolded like a quilt, old squares and new stitching. Loretta started a load of darks, taught the dryer not to boss delicate fabrics around, and wrote a little note for Richard on an index card tucked by the coffee maker. Mocha pot works if the machine decides to act uppity. She chose uppity on purpose, then crossed it out, then left it anyway, and added a smiley face because words matter and tone matters more. She wheeled Caleb's chair to the French doors and cracked them an inch. "Smell that?" she asked. The river sent a thin thread of brine through the house. "That's your town saying good morning without making a speech." She told him about Jessup Green on Saturdays, about dogs that wore raincoats, about a farmer's market where the apples looked like they'd been polished with pride. "We'll get you out there when the sun makes up its mind," she promised, and meant it. When the living room called, she answered with dust rags and patience. The rug was large enough to deserve its own zip code. She corrected the corner that curled, weighing it flat with a book of modern art heavy enough to make a preacher cuss. She wiped the baseboards and sang a piece of a song without words. Humming acts, like scaffolding. You don't notice it until something stands. Caleb watched from the threshold. He favored thresholds. They behaved like questions, not orders. Loretta let him have the distance. She reached for the record player she'd cleaned yesterday, lifted the lid with reverence that had nothing to do with preciousness and everything to do with respect. She did not put a record on. Not yet. Instead, she set the stack of vinyl on the low shelf and ran a finger over their spines like a librarian taking attendance. "You pick the weather inside a house," she said, still not looking at him. "Folks think it's the thermostat, but it's people. Cold gets in when nobody's paying attention." The first time his fingers tapped again, softer than before, a little syncopation only the floorboards could hear, she rewarded the room by opening a window shade another inch. Light hopped across the coffee table, caught in the dust motes that only appear when you clean and the sun decides to brag about it. Caleb's chin lifted a fraction like a listener tuning a dial. She didn't say, "I see you." She showed it by slowing her steps just enough for a boy's breath to match them. Around 11, Richard came downstairs with his phone to his ear and his mind already 2 conferences away. He stopped at the living room entrance. Part surprise, part inventory. The corners were neater, the mantel less crowded, the air warmer by the width of a song that hadn't started yet. "Sandra," he said into the phone, "call Stern back and move them to Thursday. No, Thursday afternoon." He clicked off and realized how quiet he'd made the silence by speaking into it. Loretta nodded once at him, then returned to the shelf where family photos waited. She didn't polish them yet. She rearranged them so that Caleb's face at 2 didn't hide behind a silver frame 3 sizes too grand. Richard watched her hands. They were careful in a way that had nothing to do with ownership. "You found the record player," he said, neutral as a weather report. "It found me," she said. "I won't turn it up. Promise." He wanted to say it wasn't about volume. He wanted to say he preferred the kind of quiet that didn't expect anything from him. Instead, he asked, "Do you need anything?" She considered the question like it was a tool she might use later. "A step stool," she said. "Top shelves think they're better than me." He almost smiled. Almost. "I'll have one brought up." After he left, the house exhaled through the open shade. Loretta went back to the kitchen and pulled a sheet of paper from the drawer, lined, the kind you make grocery lists on. She drew 3 columns and at the top of the first wrote, "Things Caleb noticed." Under it, she printed in neat block letters. Cereal moved to lower shelf, eyes followed, shaded lights, no grimace. Toast triangles, ate both pieces. In the second column she wrote, "Things that help." In the third, "Things to try." She wasn't building a treatment plan, she was building a map. Caleb rolled up as she wrote. He didn't crane his neck to see. He looked at the angle of the pen, at the way her hand made small squares of order from a morning that had asked nothing from him. When she set the paper face down, he didn't fidget. He let the not knowing be part of the arrangement. "You like stories?" she asked, wiping cinnamon from the counter with the heel of her hand. "I got a good one about my boy Jamal thinking he could fix a leaky pipe with duct tape and prayer." He didn't move. His fingers nested together like small birds. "Anyway," she said, beginning without permission, "Jamal's the kind who believes if you walk into a hardware store and look like you know what you're doing, the pipe will respect you. He comes home with a handful of joints and something called Teflon tape, and 15 minutes later, the kitchen looks like the Titanic, but with onions floating." That earned a noise, just air in and out, but it had a shape. A near laugh's little cousin. Loretta didn't celebrate. She turned to the sink and kept the story moving. He learned. We all learn, sometimes by flood. After lunch, grilled cheese and tomato soup, the pepper ground fresh because the jar asked nicely. Sandra poked her head in again. "He has OT materials," she said, half to Loretta, half to the cabinet where they were stored. "Adaptive grips, stretch bands, a standing frame in the garage. If you need to bring any of that into rotation—" "If I do, I'll start small," Loretta said. "No bursts. Bursts scare folks." Sandra nodded, then hesitated. "Look, can I ask you something? Why the records? We have every playlist in the world." "Songs people streamed for me never knew my name," Loretta said. "Records I held on to through moves and storms. They know me. And some things play better when the room knows you back." Sandra let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "Okay, poet." She softened. "For what it's worth, I hope this works. "What's this?" Loretta asked, rinsing the knife clean. "Whatever you're doing that doesn't look like doing," Sandra said, and left before she could take it back. Loretta finished the dishes, dried the counter, checked the list she'd made face down, and added one more line under things to try. Leave door open wider. Invite the beat in. The afternoon thinned into that pale slice of time when even the river seemed to nap. Caleb moved to the den and arranged his crayons in a line like a parade that refused to start. Richard passed through twice, eyes sliding over the scene the way you scan a page for your name. On the second pass, he stopped and looked properly. "What's that?" he asked, nodding at Caleb's page. The boy had drawn a rectangle with a circle inside and a line like a lever. To anyone else, it might have been a clock or a face with one wide eye. Richard squinted. "Is that a—" He didn't finish. He didn't want to be wrong. Loretta filled the silence like a good backup singer. "Looks like a record player to me," she said, nothing in her voice but certainty and a small nudge toward pride. Caleb's chin dipped, a yes so faint it could have been a draft. Richard felt something stutter in his chest. "We have one," he said too quickly. "In the living room. It's good. Old, but good." "We'll let it earn its keep," Loretta said. At 3, the dryer gave up a warm armful of dark socks and T-shirts. Loretta folded them on the dining table, rolling pairs, stacking in squares, letting the rhythm of neatness steady her breath. Caleb watched from the hallway, the distance between the threshold and the edge of the rug shrinking by inches you couldn't measure with a yardstick. When she dropped one sock, he flinched like he might go for it. She reached first, slow enough to be outrun if he chose. He didn't, not yet. "Question," she said, turning the sock into a tight little burrito. "You ever had boiled peanuts? There's a stand in Macon you can smell before you see it. Whole parking lot smells like Saturday. Folks around there will argue till Sunday about whether you season the water or sprinkle after. I say both. Belt and suspenders." She didn't get a smile. She got something else. A lessening around the eyes, a willingness to let a stranger's story sit on the couch beside him without asking what it cost in rent. By 4:30, the house grew a little restless, as houses do when daylight starts composing goodbyes. Richard, trying to pretend he didn't time his steps to match Loretta's hum, hovered at the living room archway while she wiped the last of the baseboards. "Sandra tells me you worked at a diner," he said, conversation entering like a careful guest. "From before the boys till after," she said. "Tips kept shoes on feet. Regulars kept my faith in people from getting too scuffed. You learn a lot about folks refilling their coffee cups." "What did you learn?" he asked, as if the answer might come with data. "That most people want to be seen before they want to be saved," she said simply. He didn't have a place to set that down that wasn't messy, so he nodded as if he did. "If Caleb needs anything," he started. "He needs the same things he's needed," she said, gentle, not interrupting so much as steering, just delivered different. He thought of the invoices with numbers that could buy a house in a decent school district. He thought of the calendar blocks labeled progress that had yielded nothing you could hold in your hands. For once, he didn't reach for a rebuttal. "All right," he said. Evening came in as a hush. Loretta warmed leftover soup for herself, made a fresh grilled cheese for Caleb because he'd liked the geometry of it, and left a plate under foil for Richard with a note. "Heat 5 minutes, no longer. Cheese gets mad." She took her coffee to the back step and let the cool air climb her forearms. Somewhere across the water, a train blew a soft, lonely horn. She listened to it fade. Standing still had never been her specialty. She was learning. When she came back in, she found Caleb at the living room doorway again, nearer than before, his chair angled not at the TV or the window, but at the low shelf where the records waited. He was, she realized, making the same calculation she'd made with 1,000 hard things. How close do I need to be to feel it without letting it swallow me? She didn't walk to the player. She walked to the window and drew the curtain half an inch wider. The room acknowledged the change with a breath. "We can try Mr. Sam tomorrow," she said to the glass, "or Mr. Otis, or nobody. There's no rules before breakfast." Across the hall, Sandra's voice drifted from the office, the end of a call with an insurance provider, the beginning of an email to a school board member. Richard's baritone answered now and then like a cello under a violin. The house wore their work like a sweater, useful, a little itchy, familiar. Loretta put away the last clean glass, turned the kitchen light to low, and rinsed her rag like a benediction. She glanced at the list she'd made and flipped it over to hide it from herself. No point in counting steps before feet made up their minds. Upstairs, she smoothed the quilt on her narrow bed, checked the photo by the window, 2 boys and a man with a Sunday grin, and whispered a hello that sounded like a promise. The floor beneath her feet had learned her weight in 2 days. That was faster than most floors. Down in the hall, Caleb paused at the foot of the stairs and lifted his fingers to the banister. He didn't climb. He didn't need to. A small victory can be measured by the choice to touch what once scared you. He left his hand there a minute, then dropped it and steered toward the room with the waiting turntable. When Richard came out of the office to say goodnight, he saw the boy's chair tucked 2 feet into the living room, wheels parked straight, not askew. He saw the stack of records where they could be reached. He saw a dish towel folded in a way that made the kitchen look like it knew the word welcome. "Loretta?" he called. Her answer rose from the back hall. "Yes, sir?" "Tomorrow," he said, feeling stupid even as the sentence formed. "If he wants to, if the music helps, you can." He made a vague shape in the air with his hand, a conductor with no orchestra. "It'll be low," she said, saving him from himself. He nodded, then remembered she couldn't see him and said, "Okay," out loud. Caleb slept the way he often did. On his side, knees tucked, fists uncurled only after the second hour took the room. Richard stood in the doorway too long, and then forced himself to walk away, because love isn't surveillance, no matter what he sometimes believed. Loretta, down the hall, counted her breaths to 4 and back to 1, the old trick a nurse had taught her in an ER waiting room when a different night had been too big to hold. The river slid by like a long thought. The house let go of itself by degrees. In the first thin blue of morning, the kitchen woke a minute before the people did. The coffee machine yawned. A bird tested a note outside and decided against the full song. Loretta padded in, tied her apron, and opened the curtains the rest of the way. The records on the shelf waited with the patience only old things own. She ran a finger down the side of one sleeve and felt the soft raised place where a name had once been written in pen. She rested her palm there. She didn't announce anything, not to the room or to herself. She just eased the living room door so it wouldn't catch, letting the hallway and the sunlight and whatever came next move a little freer. Loretta leaves the living room door open a little wider the next day, record player ready. By the second week, Loretta had settled into the Whitmore Estates rhythm like she'd always belonged there. She knew exactly how the morning light fell through the east windows, how the upstairs hallway creaked near the third door, and which kitchen drawer stuck just enough to need a little nudge with your hip. She knew Caleb liked his eggs soft, his toast cut into triangles, and his apple slices without the peel. She didn't coddle him, just noticed. And Caleb noticed her noticing. On Tuesday morning, the air carried the kind of stillness that came before rain. Loretta was in the living room, dusting the top of the mantel, when she glanced toward the corner where her record crate sat. She hesitated, then pulled out an Otis Redding album with a sleeve so worn the cardboard edges had gone white. She set it on the turntable, lowered the needle, and the crackle filled the room. The first notes of "These Arms of Mine" wrapped around the space, like a soft quilt. Caleb was at the doorway again, his chair angled just so he could see her without being in the middle of the room. He always watched like this, silent, still, eyes sharp as if he were memorizing every move. Loretta didn't say a word. She just started swaying, rag in one hand, her hips moving slow to the beat. She stepped left, then right, her head tilted back, eyes closed. When she opened them again, she almost missed it. Caleb's fingers were tapping, just barely, on the side of his chair. A rhythm. His rhythm. She didn't call it out. She just let the song play, her movements easy, inviting, without demanding. Upstairs, Richard was pacing his office, phone pressed to his ear, discussing quarterly numbers he barely cared about. Through the security monitor's small inset screen, something caught his eye. The feed from the living room. He paused mid-sentence. There was Loretta, moving in front of the coffee table, and Caleb. Was he? Richard stepped closer to the screen, narrowing his eyes. Caleb's hands were on the armrests, his upper body tilted forward like he was about to rise. "Richard, you still there?" His business partner's voice crackled through the phone. Richard mumbled something about calling back and hung up without explanation. He turned up the volume on the monitor, though the camera's mic only caught the faintest hum of music. Then it happened. Caleb pushed himself up, legs trembling under his weight. For a moment, Richard thought he might collapse immediately, but the boy straightened just enough to take one small, unsteady step. And another. Loretta didn't rush toward him, didn't shout for help. She just kept moving, her eyes soft, her body matching the tempo of his courage. Caleb stood for 3 more seconds, then eased himself back into the chair, breathing hard but smiling, a real smile that reached his eyes. Richard's chest tightened. He didn't remember the last time he'd seen that expression. Later that afternoon, he called Elma. "Did you say you knew this woman?" "Yes, sir," Elma replied. "Loretta Miles from Macon. She's not a nurse, but she's got more healing in her little finger than any doctor I've met." Richard glanced again at the paused frame on his monitor. Caleb mid-step, Loretta swaying in the corner. "She's doing things in 2 weeks no one's done in 7 years. Some folks carry light with them," Elma said. "They don't need training for that." That night, Richard decided he needed answers. After dinner, he waited in the living room. When Loretta passed through on her way to tidy the den, he said, "Sit down, please." His tone was clipped, formal. She eased onto the sofa, hands folded in her lap. "I saw the footage from this morning," he began. "You and Caleb. I need to know exactly what happened." Loretta's gaze was steady. "I danced, he watched, that's all." "You expect me to believe my son stood for the first time in his life because you danced?" "I don't expect you to believe anything, sir," she said calmly. "But I do expect you to listen. That boy's been surrounded by people who talk about him like he ain't in the room. I just treated him like a person, not a patient." Richard's jaw tightened. "I've spent millions on specialists, and maybe what he needed wasn't another specialist," she said, her voice low but firm. "Maybe he needed someone to see him." Richard didn't have a reply for that. When Loretta left the room, he stayed, staring at the paused image on the monitor again. Caleb standing, smiling. And for the first time in years, Richard wondered if the problem hadn't been Caleb at all, but the way he'd been looking at him. Upstairs, Caleb lay awake, thinking about the music, the way it felt in his chest. He whispered into the dark, "I'm not scared anymore." The next day would prove whether he meant it. By noon the next day, the house knew it wasn't just theirs anymore. Phones don't ring like that unless the world has learned your number. And the Whitmore lines, office, kitchen wall, even the old landline Richard kept because Elma said emergencies don't care about cell towers, took turns lighting up. At first, it was a pediatric clinic in New Haven, asking, very politely, for permission to study the video Richard hadn't told anyone about. Then a morning show booker who apologized for calling so early from Los Angeles and asked if the family would be open to a soft human interest segment with dignity. Richard didn't return either call. He was in his office, staring at the living room feed paused on his son's body mid-step when the third phone began to vibrate against his desk like a trapped insect. "Richard?" Sandra's voice sounded thin, like it had traveled through too many wires. "Do you have a second?" "Not really," he said. He did not take his eyes off the screen. Caleb's mouth was open the way it gets when you're surprised by your own success. Loretta was on the far side of the frame, her shoulder turned toward the camera, mid-sway. The rug's pattern blurred under Caleb's feet because the camera was too far away to do justice to a moment like that. "I posted something," Sandra said, and the quiet in his office grew teeth. "A clip. 30 seconds. No faces. No names. A private group for parents. It was supposed to be, 'What did you do?'" He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The words evacuated the room anyway. "A share," she said. "Just hope. I swear I kept it anonymous. But people saved it and re-uploaded and—" She exhaled a small, guilty laugh that had nothing to do with humor. "It's everywhere." Richard set the phone on speaker and walked to the window as if distance might make him calmer. Outside, the river carried a shine that had nothing to do with him. "Take it down." "I did, but it's already—" She didn't finish. She didn't have to. The pinging on his laptop did it for her. Mentions, links, a subject line that read, "Miracle Step?" with a question mark big enough to swallow a man. He turned the speaker off and called the security company, then a lawyer, then, because there was no other adult in the house who had permission to tell him what he didn't want to hear, he called Elma. "Mr. Whitmore," she answered, her voice a rocking chair on a back porch 2 states away. "I wondered when I'd hear from you." "Did you see it?" he asked. "Sandra texted me. She meant well. You know that." He stared at the paused frame again. "Meaning well isn't the same as doing right." "No," Elma said, "but it ain't nothing either." She let him be angry for a count of 10 and then added, "How's the boy?" "Breathing," Richard said, too quickly, and then softened. He stood Elma. He took 2 steps, maybe 3. "I saw." Her voice fell to a whisper like you do when you enter a sanctuary. "Congratulations." He couldn't take congratulations. He hadn't done anything. "I need to handle whatever this is." "You need to be a daddy who handles what the attention might do to that child and to the woman who helped him," Elma said. "You know how folks talk." He did. He knew too well. "I'll call you later." "You do that," she said, in the tone of a person who intends to love you even when you don't deserve it. When he hung up, the office felt both too small and too exposed. Downstairs, the house offered its ordinary sounds. Dishwater running, a drawer closing, a soft hum that might have been Loretta or the refrigerator's opinion of itself. He walked to the top of the stairs and listened. In the kitchen, Loretta stood with her phone in her hand, not scrolling, just holding it like a hot mug you haven't decided to drink. The screen showed a blurry still of her own back, a headline that read, "Mysterious Maid Sparks Miracle," and a comments section that had already grown rows of little blue thumbs like a garden you couldn't weed fast enough. She read 5 comments, then stopped at the 6th. "No maid can do what a licensed therapist can," it said. Another, "Probably staged. People will do anything for views." Then, "This is what happens when rich people let staff play doctor." There were kind words, too. Dozens. Hundreds. "I'm crying. This made my week." Whoever she is, she's an angel. But kindness can be heavy, too, when you're not prepared to carry it. The ugly ones, though, they are sharp. Loretta put the phone face down and pressed the heel of her hand against the counter, steadying herself as if the house had tilted. She had seen what a headline could do to a boy who had already learned not to look up when grown folks spoke his name. She knew the shape of that damage. She could trace it with her finger. Caleb sat at the island with his coloring book open. A green crayon lined up next to a blue, both sharpened within an inch of their usefulness. He watched Loretta without looking at her. Children know the difference between people who are simply in the room and people who keep the room from coming apart. He tapped his crayon once, twice, then stopped when she turned, because part of the deal they had made without words was that he could be small if she made the world big enough. "You want grilled cheese again?" she asked, the light back in her voice, because she had put it there on purpose. "Or we feeling brave for turkey today?" Caleb's eyes flicked to the bread on the counter, then to the skillet. He made no sound. She took that as permission and warmed the pan. Richard came in like a weather front that didn't know which season it belonged to. "Sandra," he said, not seeing that she wasn't in the room. "Loretta." He stopped, finally noticed the phone on the counter, finally noticed the way Loretta's hands stilled on the butter knife for half a beat longer than necessary. "I'm handling it," he said, because that was the thing he knew how to say when a problem refused to behave. "We'll issue a statement. He reached for the phone. "Who posted this?" "I don't know who reposted," Loretta said. "I know who posted first." "Who?" "Sandra," she said, like a person handing back a truth with both hands so it wouldn't break. He closed his eyes. "Of course." "She meant it to be private," Loretta said, "because fairness matters even when you're hurt. And for what it's worth, the clip was kind. No faces. Sometimes the world don't care about the parts you keep kind." Richard nodded, a movement that felt like a concession and a confession. "I'm sorry," he said, not sure which wrong he was apologizing for, and suspecting there were more than one. "I should have—" He gestured helplessly at the air, as if expectations could be rearranged like furniture. Loretta slid the sandwich into the pan. The butter answered in a low sizzle. "What you should have done is ask," she said. "Ask me if I was ready to be seen. Ask your boy if he was ready to be seen." Asking doesn't take the sting out of it if the answer is no, but at least it makes the next thing we do honest. He stood there, a man with too many suits and not enough language. "I'll fix it." "You can't fix people," she said soft. "You can fix a leak or a hinge, people you can protect and you can stand next to." He didn't have a toolbox for that. The doorbell rang. Then the gate buzzer on the wall chimed with a polite tone that pretended it wasn't delivering a headache. Sandra hurried in from the office, hair no longer perfect. "There are 2 vans at the gate," she said. "Local news. And a woman who says she's with a parent network in Norwalk. She's sweet, actually." Richard's mouth flattened. "No one comes in." "I already said that," Sandra answered. "They just want to comment." "My comment is no." Sandra swallowed, and for the first time since he'd met her years ago, she looked younger than her competence. "Richard, She glanced at Loretta, then back at him. "I'm sorry, I thought people needed to see something good. I didn't think they'd swarm." He wanted to be furious with her. He wanted to unload the hot weight he was carrying into a place that could hold it. But she was right about one thing. There had been so little good, and when people are starved, they forget to chew. He held the anger in his teeth and let it dissolve. "We'll deal with it," he said. "Close the gate. Tell them we'll make a statement later." Sandra nodded and disappeared down the hall, phone already at her ear. For the rest of the morning, the house became a tug-of-war between the inside and the outside. Richard took calls in his office with the door half closed, sentences like privacy and minor and legally actionable walking around on their hind legs. Loretta kept the kitchen moving forward, a pot of soup, a pan of cornbread, a stack of plates that had every right to be clean and useful, no matter what the internet had decided to think about them. Caleb lurked at the edge of both worlds, snooping the way only a quiet child can, one ear to the adult mess, one hand on the steady things that make a day a day. When Loretta finally made herself stop and sit, she took her phone with her to the back porch. The air had that faint metal smell you get before rain. She sat with her hands on her knees, phone face down again, as if it might behave differently if it believed it wasn't the center of the story. Trees on the property line lifted their arms to the sky like they knew a rehearsal from a performance. The screen lit up with another notification, even though she hadn't touched it. She gave up and looked. A message from a woman in Texas, a video of a boy in a backyard taking 3 careful steps toward a plastic slide. The caption read, "We saw your video and tried music." He smiled for the first time all week. "Thank you." Another message. "My daughter swayed to Sam Cooke today. We didn't push. She swayed. That was enough. God bless you, whoever you are." And then, as if the internet were determined to be itself, a comment beneath a repost. "Bet this is fake. People will use a disabled kid for clout." Loretta set the phone in her lap and folded her hands over it. She could feel her heart in her wrist, the way it did when grief wanted to be loud and you insisted it behave. She remembered a different porch in Georgia, a different afternoon full of unwelcome attention, a boy she loved looking at his shoes, while strangers looked at him like a headline you could solve if you only talked loud enough. The screen door clicked. Richard stood there with 2 mugs of coffee and that expression men wear when they are trying to get out of their own way. "I don't know how you take it," he said, offering one. "Hot," she said, taking it, "and grateful." He sat beside her and let the quiet do the talking for a minute. The property looked like it always did. River holding a strip of light, grass cut in obedient lines, a breeze persuading the leaves to pretend they were applause. He cleared his throat. "I'm sorry this happened." "I know," she said. "I should have protected your privacy and his. I should have made sure—" He swallowed the rest. "I'm new at the part where feelings have to be managed, like anything else that matters." "Feelings don't get managed," she said gently. "They get respected." He nodded as if someone had just given him the instructions he'd been missing. "If you want me to make a statement," he said, "I will. Something that says, this is not a miracle, this is not content, this is a child, and a woman who deserves not to be turned into a story against her will." She looked at him, really looked, and let the relief be small so it could be real. "That's kind," she said. "I'm not mad it got out." She lifted her phone and turned it over again. "I'm mad it happened without anyone asking if I was ready." He winced. "For what it's worth, I didn't ask Caleb if he was ready either. I just kept trying to fix him." "Trying is love's clumsy cousin," she said, a smile alive at the edges. "You'll learn the dance." They sat there long enough for the coffee to go warm and the breeze to pick up the smell of rain from a mile away. When they went back inside, the afternoon had shifted. The calls kept coming, but the panic wasn't steering anymore. Loretta set the cornbread on the counter and covered it with a clean towel. Caleb rolled in, paused, and reached toward the towel with 2 fingers, the way you'd test a surface to see if it will hold. Loretta lifted the corner so he could smell the butter. He closed his eyes and leaned in. That counted. At 3, Richard stood in the living room and faced the camera on his phone the way a person faces a mirror before a long day. Hopeful he won't embarrass himself, resigned to a little mess. He recorded a short statement. No hashtags, no polished graphics, just a father in a room where his son had surprised him. He said the words Loretta had given him and the ones he'd found on his own, that his child is not a miracle and not a symbol, that progress belongs to the boy who chooses it, that the woman in the video is named Loretta Miles, and that she is part of their family's life, whether the internet approves or not. He ended with, "Please leave my son alone." He sent it to a reporter he trusted and to the handful of people who had emailed in good faith. Then he put the phone down and went to sit with Caleb at the island. "What are we drawing today?" he asked, and was not ashamed of how tentative it sounded. Caleb's pencil made a rectangle again, a circle inside it, a line like a lever. Richard smiled before he could stop himself. "Record player," he said. The boy's chin dipped. That same quiet, "Yes." "Maybe," Richard said, "we should get you your own." Loretta looked up from the stove, surprise flickering across her face and then settling into something warmer. "If he's going to stand," Richard added, "might as well let him dance too." Sandra leaned against the doorway and exhaled the kind of breath you take when you've been bracing. "There's still a van outside," she said, "but they're quieter now, waiting." "They can wait," Richard said. "We'll talk when we're ready." After lunch, the weather followed through on its promise. Rain came in soft at first, then steadier, drumming on the patio like fingers impatient for good news. Loretta liked rain. It gave people permission to be inside on purpose. She took a stack of towels to the back hall and paused by the door to her room. The photo by the window, 2 boys and a man with a Sunday grin, caught a small wedge of light. She touched the frame and told the room, "We're okay." Then she went back to the business of keeping a house standing upright while the outside leaned. Near 5 o'clock, the calls slowed. The comment sections, which had been sprinting, fell into a jog. The email inbox began to resemble something a person could sort in an evening. Richard stood at the sink with a dish towel because actions work better than apologies after a certain point. "You cook, I'll wash," he said. "You don't have to," Loretta replied, sliding a pan into the drying rack. "I know," he said. "I want to." Caleb hovered with a dish he'd insisted on carrying from the table to the counter, small hands around the rim, concentration knotted between his brows. He reached, missed the edge by an inch, adjusted, set the plate down without the clatter that used to scare him. Loretta didn't clap. She met his eye for one beat longer than usual and let pride sit there without a speech. When the plates were done, Richard dried his hands and looked at Loretta like a man about to try on a word he'd never worn. "Thank you," he said, "for what you're doing. And for what you're not doing. You're not making a show of it. You're not asking him to perform. You're not asking me to pretend I understand." "Understanding can come later," she said. "Respect comes first." He nodded and picked up his phone from the counter. Another message, this one from the principal at Caleb's school, a woman with kind eyes and the patience of a gardener. He read it and breathed. "They want to send a note to the other parents," he said. "A reminder about privacy." "Good," Loretta said. "A reminder never hurt anybody." Outside, the rain softened to a hush. The river held a smear of gray that turned silver at the edges. The house, which had been tense all day, loosened its shoulders. Caleb tugged the edge of the towel covering the cornbread again and released a puff of warm air as if to prove that some good things stay good whether or not a camera catches them. Later, when evening found its lamps, Loretta took her coffee to the back step the way she had that morning. Richard joined her without asking if he could. He sat with his hands empty for once and let the quiet do its work. The gate camera showed a single car idling under the trees, the last reporter finishing a phone call and finally driving away. "I'm going to hold a small press thing," he said after a while, the words careful. "Not at the house. Town hall. Tomorrow morning. Short. Then it's done. No more gates. No more hiding behind statements someone else wrote. Just me saying what needs to be said." "You ready?" Loretta asked. His mouth twisted. "I thought I was ready for a lot of things in my life. This isn't one of them." "It don't have to be perfect," she said. "It just has to be honest." He glanced at her. Would you come?" She shook her head, gentle but firm. "No, sir, that's yours to do. I'll stay with the boy." "Right." He swallowed and nodded like a student who had finally understood the assignment. "Right." They listened to the last of the rain. In the room behind them, the dishwasher ticked, then fell quiet. Somewhere, a train made the kind of sound you feel in your ribs first. Loretta thought of the messages from strangers, the kind ones and the mean ones, and the ones that asked questions no one could answer in a comment thread. She thought of the boy sleeping down the hall who had stood, because his body had remembered how to listen. She thought of the man beside her, learning a softer way to be strong. She rose first. "I'm going to check on Caleb," she said. "I'll be there in a minute," he answered. In Caleb's room, the nightlight threw a small circle on the wall, a moon no bigger than a plate. Loretta tucked the blanket along his legs, the way nurses do when they want to offer comfort without waking you. His lashes made shadows on his cheeks. She watched him breathe and let her own lungs follow. "We're okay," she whispered. "We're right here." Richard stood in the hallway and watched Loretta stand in the doorway and watched his son sleep and felt, for the first time in a long time, like a man who knew where to be. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Some truths behave better in the quiet. When Loretta slipped past him, he stayed a second longer. Then he did the thing that had been waiting all day to be done. He put his hand on the doorframe and let his forehead follow, a light touch, not a surrender. "We're going to do this right," he said, to the wood, to the air, to the boy who could not hear him and who would know anyway. He went back downstairs and started drafting phrases for the morning, sentences that wore no makeup. "My son is not a spectacle. The woman in the video has a name." Progress belongs to him, not to the internet. He crossed out a line that sounded clever and kept the one that sounded true. By the time the house settled for real, the gate camera was empty. The river had returned to its ordinary work. The phones had stopped pretending they were urgent. Loretta's room held its narrow bed and its photo, and a woman who slept lightly but well. Caleb's room held a boy who had stood and might again. The living room held a record player that would earn its keep tomorrow or not. No rush, no demands. Richard stood at the window and watched his reflection open its mouth and close it again as if rehearsing. He thought about the word ready and how it tricks you into believing it's a destination. He thought about the door Loretta had left open wider that morning, about the way light finds its chance. And then, like a bell struck once somewhere far away, a single sentence arrived and made a home in his head, too simple to be profound and too heavy to ignore. He had never asked his son if he was ready. The rain came on Thursday, steady and cold, tapping against the tall windows like an impatient guest. The Whitmore estate always felt bigger when it rained, the echo of empty rooms somehow louder. Loretta moved through the kitchen with the same easy rhythm as always, humming under her breath while a pot of chicken soup simmered on the stove. Caleb sat at the table, pencil in hand, coloring slowly in a book of landscapes. He didn't rush, didn't glance up at the sound of footsteps. Richard stood in the doorway, watching them both. He told himself he'd come in to grab a cup of coffee, but really he was trying to understand something that had been gnawing at him since Tuesday. 2 days, and he still hadn't asked Caleb about standing up. He wanted to, God, he wanted to, but part of him was afraid of the answer. Afraid it would confirm that what he saw had nothing to do with him and everything to do with the woman now ladling soup into bowls. He cleared his throat. "Good morning." "Morning, Mr. Whitmore," Loretta replied, her back to him. Caleb looked up briefly, then back to his page. Richard poured himself coffee, hesitated, then sat at the table across from his son. "That's nice," he said, nodding toward the picture. "Looks like the river out back." Caleb's pencil paused. He didn't speak, but his eyes flicked up just for a moment. Before Richard could say more, Sandra Lee appeared in the doorway, phone in hand, her expression tight. "You need to see this," she said. He followed her into his office, where she placed the phone on his desk. The screen showed a short, grainy video clip, 30 seconds long, of Caleb standing in the living room, Loretta swaying in the corner. The angle and timestamp matched exactly what he'd seen on the security feed. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice low. "It's on Facebook," Sandra said carefully. "A private group for parents of kids with neurological disorders. Someone posted it this morning. No names, no faces, but—" She hesitated. "It's already been shared hundreds of times." Richard's jaw clenched. "Who posted it?" Sandra's silence was answer enough. "You?" His tone was sharp. She didn't flinch. "I thought it could give people hope. There's nothing identifying—" "It's my son," he snapped. "Our lives are not a public spectacle." Her voice stayed calm, but her eyes were steady. "This isn't about you, Richard, or control. This is about showing people what's possible. And you know as well as I do, Loretta did something in 2 weeks no one else managed in 7 years. He didn't answer, not because she was wrong, but because she wasn't. By evening, the clip had been shared thousands more times. News outlets were calling, emails were piling up, and his phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Richard ignored them all. But Loretta? She couldn't. She sat alone in her small upstairs room, phone in hand, staring at an online article. Mysterious Maid Sparks Miracle. The photo wasn't even her face, just her back, the knot of her headscarf, Caleb's chair in the frame. But she knew what came next. Headlines, questions, people digging into her life. She'd lived through it once before. When her older boy Kendrick got into trouble at 16, the newspapers didn't write, "Teenager makes mistake." They wrote, "Black boy from Georgia arrested." Employers read the headlines, not the details. Loretta had learned to keep her head down after that, to stay small and invisible. So when Richard knocked on her door that night, she almost didn't answer. "I'm sorry this happened," he said when she opened it. I should have protected your privacy." "I'm not mad it got out," she said softly. "I'm mad no one asked if I was ready." They stood in silence for a moment, the sound of rain filling the gap. "For what it's worth," Richard said, "I didn't ask Caleb if he was ready either. I just kept trying to fix him like he was a problem to be solved." She looked at him, her eyes steady. He stood up because he wanted to. I gave him music. I gave him a beat. But that was his choice. Stop giving credit to everyone but that boy's heart. The next morning, Richard did something no one expected. Not his assistant, not the board members waiting for his weekly call. He scheduled a press conference. When the cameras flashed, he didn't speak as CEO of Whitmore Capital. He spoke as a father. "My son stood, not because of a miracle, but because someone believed in him," he said, voice steady. "Her name is Loretta Miles, and she is not just a maid. She is a teacher, a healer, and the person who gave my son back to me." Loretta didn't watch it live. She was in the kitchen, stirring oatmeal while Sam Cooke played low. Caleb sat at the table, a small smile on his face. "Can we dance after breakfast?" he asked. Her lips curved. "You bet we can, baby." Westport Town Hall always looked a little too proud of its columns, like a white-painted ship that had decided to dock in the middle of Main Street and never leave. By 9:30 the next morning, the steps were busy with cameras and tripods and the crisp rustle of press passes. A woman from the local paper stood beside a man from a cable station out of Stamford. Two high school kids with phones mounted on stabilizers practiced their live intros in whispers. The air had that after-the-rain brightness that makes everything seem newly ironed. Richard arrived in a navy suit that fit the way success is supposed to, but he didn't wear it like armor today. He paused at the foot of the steps, looked up at the doorway, and let himself take one long breath he couldn't remember taking in any boardroom. Sandra met him halfway with a folder and a look that asked if they were really doing this. "We're really doing this," he said, answering out loud. "I printed a short statement," she said. "You don't have to use it." He glanced at the paper, then folded it once and slid it into his pocket, like a good luck charm he didn't actually believe in. "No notes," he said. "Just truth." Inside the hallway, the town clerk offered coffee from a pump pot that had seen 100 long mornings. "Cream and sugar are on the end," she said, the way small kindnesses always make room for themselves. When Richard stepped to the podium, the murmurs settled into that soft hush a room makes when it's willing to give you a chance. The seal of Westport glowed behind him like a polite moon. He looked down at his hands. One nicked at the knuckle from a careless kitchen glass last night, and then out at the faces. Some he knew. The principal from Caleb's school, the librarian who had once tracked down an out-of-print picture book Caleb had fixated on, a man from church who always shook too hard. Many he didn't. The point was to talk to all of them as if he could see them. "Thank you for coming," he began, and the microphone rounded off the edges of his voice, made it warmer than he felt. "I'll be brief." A reporter at the front lifted her pen without meaning to. "Good news rarely asks much of your time." Richard set his palms on either side of the podium like he was steadying a table before you set a birthday cake on it. "A video of my son has been circulating," he said. "In it, he stands from his chair. You can see a woman in the corner of the frame. She's dancing. The clip has been shared widely. There's been a lot of speculation about who she is and about him and about what happened." He didn't clear his throat. He didn't smile to soften the next sentence. "My son's name is Caleb. He's 7. He's funny when he thinks no one is looking, and he likes his toast in triangles. He's a child, not a story for the internet to chew on." A murmur, then stillness. "The woman in that video is named Loretta Miles," he continued. "She works in our home. She's from Macon, Georgia. She is not a licensed therapist. She is not just a maid. She is a teacher and a healer and someone who showed up every single day and treated my son like a person." He let that sit there long enough for it to be written down in people's heads. "Caleb stood because he wanted to," Richard said, "because he felt safe, because someone made space for him to try without asking him to perform." He exhaled through his nose, the way you do when you step off a porch into honest weather. "I was one of those people who thought credentials mattered more than kindness. I was wrong. I judged her by where she came from instead of who she is." Pins scratched. A camera shutter clicked so softly it sounded like a blink. "I'm asking for privacy for my son," he said, and the plea inside the words, the one he'd been carrying like a rock in his chest for years, finally came out. "If you want to write a story, write about patience. Write about what happens when someone refuses to rush another person's becoming. And if you talk about Ms. Miles, use her name." Hands lifted. He nodded at the reporter from the local paper. "Will you be pursuing any legal action regarding the leak?" she asked. "We're addressing how it happened," he said, "but I don't intend to turn a moment of my son's courage into a lawsuit." A man in a gray sport coat, cable station, leaned forward. "Is Ms. Miles trained in any specific technique?" "She's trained in being present," Richard said. "If there's a certification for that, I haven't seen it." The room let out a small, genuine laugh, not mean, not nervous. He answered 2 more questions, one about school accommodations, one about the timeline for appointments that had already been canceled, and then he ended the way he had planned all night. "Please," he said, "leave my boy alone. Thank you." As he stepped away from the podium, the principal gave him a faint thumbs up. The librarian pressed a hand to her heart, and the clerk brought the coffee pot closer, like she'd heard a long sermon, and decided everyone deserved a refill. Outside, Sandra fell into step beside him. "You did good," she said, then corrected herself. "You did right." He didn't feel triumphant. He felt rinsed. "Let's go home." Back at the house, the morning had unspooled without television or timelines. Loretta left the news off on purpose. She set a record on low, Sam, not Otis, and made grilled cheese the way Caleb liked, with the pan hot enough to crisp the edges and the cheese melted to that place between patience and collapse. The rain smell had faded, replaced by the serious warmth of butter. Caleb lifted his face as if listening with his skin. "You want to help me cut?" she asked, laying the sandwich on the board. He considered the knife like a question on a spelling test and then shook his head. She nodded, sliced the triangle anyway, and slid the plate just where he liked it. "You want to hear something silly?" she asked. "When I was little, I used to think the grill marks on a cheese sandwich were a kind of road map. I'd pretend a little car was driving through, trying to get to the corner where the extra cheese hides." A noise escaped him. Not a laugh, but its promise. He took a bite and closed his eyes on purpose, like a person who knows how to thank without words. They ate at the island. Loretta wiped crumbs into her palm and listened to the house more than the song. Somewhere, a drip found the sink. Upstairs, a floorboard remembered a footstep and made a small complaint. The ordinary world was busy keeping them safe. When Richard and Sandra came in from the garage, they brought a gust of outside air and the faint scent of wet wool. "Hey, buddy," Richard said, softer than he had ever said it in a room where someone else could hear. Caleb looked up from his plate and let his father's presence sit beside him without flinching. "How'd it go?" Loretta asked, not stopping her hands. She didn't need a transcript. She wanted the temperature. "Honest," he said. "I hope that's enough." "Honest always is," she said. "Maybe not fast, but enough." Sandra set her phone face down on the counter and took a long breath. "You'll want to know, calls are slowing. A couple of outlets picked up your statement. The tone is better." "Good," Richard said. He glanced at Caleb's plate, at the triangle edges, lined up like a quiet parade. "After lunch, you two want to—" He made a vague shape in the air, still clumsy at naming good things. "Put on a record?" "We will," Loretta said, saving him from the verb. "After we wipe our hands." They cleaned up without ceremony, wiping, rinsing, stacking. Richard took a dish towel without being asked and dried a glass like a man who had chosen to live in his own house. When Loretta reached for the turntable, she did it the way she had the first time, with a reverence that was more about the moment than the object. She set Otis on low, the needle finding its place with a crackle that always makes a soul square its shoulders. "Come on," she told the room. Not a command, an invitation. She swayed small, then smaller, like a person warming a new joint. She let the beat be a suggestion and gave Caleb all the time in the world to decide. He stared at her, then at the triangle of light on the rug, then at his hands on the armrests. You could watch the decision move through him like weather. He shifted forward, planted his feet, and rose. Not all the way, not fast. Enough. Loretta kept her motion steady as an answer. He took one step, then another, and then, when his body told him the truth about limits, he sat back down with a breath that turned into a smile on the way out. Richard watched from the doorway. He didn't cheer. He didn't calculate how many seconds or how far. He leaned one shoulder against the frame and let the word proud sit there without having to be said. "We should get you your own record player," he said, as if repeating the idea made it more possible. Caleb's head tipped. Yes, the way yes looks when it's still learning to talk. Sandra swiped at her eye and pretended it was dust. The afternoon had the soft edges of a day that had done more than it promised. Calls thinned to the kind you could return at dinner. The gate camera sent an image of a fox trotting along the fence line as if to remind them the world had its own schedule. Loretta took laundry from the dryer and folded on the dining table where the light was forgiving. Caleb rolled up to watch, not because folding fascinated him, but because the sound of cotton turning into tidy stacks is a kind of proof that care is happening right in front of you. Richard brought in a small box from the porch with a smile he couldn't hide. "Delivery," he said. "We didn't order anything," Sandra said, already suspicious. "I did," he admitted. He opened the box and lifted out a compact record player, not a showpiece, just a simple turntable in a wood grain case. "It's not fancy," he said to Caleb, "but it'll do the job." Caleb stared, then touched the corner with one finger the way you touch a sleeping cat. Loretta set a hand against her chest for a second, just a second, then reached for the Otis sleeve and offered it to him. "You want to put him on?" she asked. He shook his head. Not yet." "That's fine," she said. "We can just let it be pretty to look at." In the late afternoon, after the light went the color of tea and the kitchen collected the small stories of the day, Richard disappeared into his office and came back with a floppy-spined photo album he hadn't opened in years. He set it on the island and flipped to a picture of Caleb at 2 in a pumpkin patch, cheeks round, eyes surprised. "I keep meaning to hang this," he said, half to himself. Loretta stood beside him, shoulder to shoulder like a friend in a museum. "Look at that smile," she said. "He was telling you something even then." "What?" Richard asked, honest for once. "That he's his own self," she said. "That he'll get where he's going the way he's built to." He closed the album on a breath that sounded like relief. Dinner was simple on purpose. Spaghetti, salad, garlic bread that never once apologized for itself. They ate around the island again because the big table made them feel like strangers. Sandra told a story about a mail carrier who waved at the security camera every day at 2:17 as if it were a friend. Richard said he might learn to make scrambled eggs correctly if someone would teach him. Caleb listened and once reached for the Parmesan himself without being asked. One small decision flickering into independence like a match that meant to become a candle. After dishes, Loretta carried 2 mugs to the back step. The evening brought a mild breeze off the Saugatuck, and the sky kept a few leftover clouds the way a table keeps crumbs. Richard joined her with his hands empty and a face that had lost the color of panic. "You were right," he said. "About what?" she asked. "About asking," he said. "About seeing." She didn't make a speech. "It's a muscle," she said. "You build it." He thought about all the muscles he had tried to build in other rooms: influence, revenue, reputation. None of them had ever steadied his hands like this one. "Tomorrow," he said, "I'm going to call the school. I want to ask better questions." "That's a good tomorrow," she said. They sat and let the quiet dress them. After a while, Richard stood. "I'll go check the front," he said. "Make sure the world remembered to stay on the other side of the gate." She watched him go, thinking not about gates, but about doors. There are doors you open for others and doors you open inside yourself. She felt one of the latter unlock on a hinge she'd oiled with silence for years. When she went back in, Caleb was in the living room, coloring book open to a page with a river and 2 trees. He had chosen the soft green and was careful not to push hard enough to tear the paper. The new record player sat on the low table like a guest who didn't mind waiting to be introduced. "Baby," she said, and the word carried every good thing she knew how to pack into 2 syllables. He looked up. "Can I tell you something? Not now, if now is too loud, but soon." He watched her the way only children and old men watch, without blinking. She knelt so her eyes matched his. Up close, she could see the flecks of lighter brown near his pupils, the places where fear had once kept house and was now packing up. "I want to tell you about my boy," she said. "The younger one, Darius. He didn't talk for a while after something bad happened. Not because he had nothing to say, because sometimes your heart has to teach your mouth to trust again." She smiled, small and true. "It's a long story, but I think you're ready. And I think I am, too." He didn't nod. He didn't look away. He pressed the crayon tip down and drew one more line of green along the riverbank like he was saying yes in the language he knew best. She put a hand over her apron pocket, feeling for the folded paper she carried there, the old drawing with stick figures and a triangle dress and a crooked grin that she had taken out and put back 100 times in the last week. "Tomorrow after breakfast," she said. "We'll sit outside if the sun behaves. I'll tell you everything." He blinked slow, and a corner of his mouth lifted. Not a smile exactly, the beginning of one. She stood and turned the living room light down to a warm hum. Out in the hall, Richard's voice floated back from the front door, easy, unhurried. In the kitchen, the dishwasher clicked through to its last rinse, and the house settled its shoulders for the night. Loretta rested her palm on the new record player, felt the faint warmth of wood under her hand, and let the promise carry her forward. She had decided. Tomorrow she would tell Caleb about Darius. The sun over Westport had the soft edge of early autumn, warm without being urgent, spilling across the Prescott backyard like a gentle hand smoothing a bedspread. The maple tree at the far corner had just started to blush, a slow tide of orange working its way through the green. Loretta liked this time of year, when the air felt honest, cool in the shadows, forgiving in the light. It reminded her of Georgia mornings before the humidity had a chance to take over, before the day decided what kind of trouble it might bring. She carried 2 mugs of cocoa out to the porch, steam curling up and catching in the low sun. One for herself, one for Caleb, who sat in his wheelchair near the railing, sketchbook open across his lap. He had drawn the maple tree, or at least its outline, with careful strokes. The leaves were left blank for now, like he was still deciding which colors belonged there. "Thought you might want something sweet before the wind takes the day," she said, setting his mug on the low table between them. He glanced at it, then at her, the corner of his mouth twitching into that half-smile she'd come to recognize. Not just politeness, but quiet thanks. Loretta settled into the chair beside him, letting the wood creak under her weight. She took a sip, closed her eyes for a moment, and then opened them to the tree, the yard, the life she'd found herself in. For a second, she felt almost safe enough to start. "I told you yesterday I had a story," she began, her voice low but steady. Caleb's pencil stilled against the page. "It's about my younger boy, Darius. I don't talk about him much, not because I don't want to, but because sometimes talking about the people you love means pulling old glass out of your chest." She didn't look at him while she spoke. It was easier to talk to the tree, to the way its branches swayed, like they were nodding along. Darius was 6 when his daddy died. He was in the back seat that day, just like his brother Lennel. He didn't get a scratch, at least not one you could see. But after that, he stopped talking. Not a word for almost a year. The house got real quiet, except for the sound of him drawing. Caleb's eyes dropped to his own sketchbook, then back to her face. "He drew everything," she went on. "Us at the table, the dog in the yard, sometimes the road outside. But no colors, just pencil lines, like he was afraid color might give something away. I used to leave a box of crayons next to his bed. Took months before he used the blue. Then one day, he drew a river." She paused, smiling faintly at the memory. "I asked him why, and you know what he said? Because rivers don't stay still. First thing he'd said to me in 11 months. And once it started, it came back slow, like spring water through old pipes. Not perfect, but enough." Caleb's hand hovered over the orange crayon. Loretta nodded toward his drawing. "You can leave it blank if you want. Sometimes you're not ready for the color yet. That's fine." They sat in the comfortable quiet for a while, sipping cocoa, the wind brushing past like it had business elsewhere. Inside, Richard stood just beyond the kitchen doorway, listening without meaning to. He had come down for more coffee, but her voice, low, certain, stopped him in place. He thought about all the therapists who had tried to coax Caleb forward, and about this woman who was simply telling him a story about her boy. And he thought about something else, too, the way she had said before the wind takes the day, like she knew how quickly good moments can blow away if you're not looking. He turned back upstairs without being seen. Some stories weren't meant to be interrupted. That afternoon, Loretta brought the new record player onto the porch, setting it on a low stool so Caleb could see. She chose a Ray Charles record this time, the kind of music that draped itself over you like a blanket. She let the needle drop, the first notes crackling through the cool air. "Want to try it yourself?" she asked. Caleb shook his head, but his fingers tapped on the armrest in time with the beat. Loretta grinned. "That's fine. Tapping counts as dancing in some places." Richard stepped out a few minutes later, a folder under his arm. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. "Porch don't belong to me," Loretta said. "It does today," he replied, easing into the chair beside them. They listened together, three people connected by nothing more complicated than shared air and the slow spin of vinyl. The maple leaves stirred above them, dropping a single one onto Caleb's sketchbook. He picked it up, examined its shape, and then, without hesitation, reached for the orange crayon. Loretta caught the movement and swallowed the lump in her throat. "Looks like the tree's making up your mind for you," she said. By sunset, the page was half filled with orange leaves. Not perfect, but enough. That night, after Caleb had gone to bed, Richard found Loretta in the kitchen washing mugs. "About this morning," he said, leaning against the counter. "Thank you for telling him." She didn't look up. "He's ready to hear more than people think." "I'm starting to believe that," Richard said. He hesitated, then added, "There's something I haven't told you either. About the meeting I had today. It wasn't just business." Loretta dried her hands, finally meeting his eyes. "What kind of meeting?" He opened his mouth to answer, but the sharp buzz of the intercom cut him off. The gate camera feed lit up on the kitchen screen. Two men in suits, holding clipboards, standing just outside the property line. Richard frowned. "I didn't schedule anything." Loretta's face tightened, a flicker of something old and wary crossing her features. She stepped closer to the screen, her eyes narrowing as she looked at the men. "You know them?" Richard asked. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I know the kind." The buzzer rang again. "You know, when I look back on it now, it wasn't the moment the boy stood that stayed with me the longest. It was the way the house felt in the days after. There was a softness in the air, like the hush that comes right after a snowfall. People moved slower, spoke gentler. Even the walls seemed to lean in, as if listening. Loretta's laughter, low, steady, unhurried, floated from room to room, and somehow it felt like it had always been there, just waiting to be heard. The maple leaves were turning then, and I remember thinking how strange it was that change can be both sudden and slow all at once. Life has a way of teaching us, often through the people we least expect. Loretta came from a world most in that neighborhood didn't bother to understand, a world the Black community has carried on its back for generations, built on work done quietly, often invisibly, yet shaping the very ground others walk on. Folks saw a maid, a pair of worn shoes, a faded headscarf. What they didn't see, at least not at first, was the patience, the knowing, the kind of wisdom you only earn by living through storms and still finding the will to plant something in the dirt the next morning. In a time when too many rush to judgment, she reminded everyone that the measure of a person isn't in the polish of their title, but in the steadiness of their light. And here's the truth of it. Dignity isn't loud, and real strength doesn't swagger. It stands when the moment calls, it speaks when silence would cost too much, and it refuses to let pain turn into bitterness. The Black community knows that kind of strength better than most. It's been their inheritance and their burden. What Loretta did in that house wasn't about teaching a boy to walk. It was about showing everyone else how to see him, and maybe, just maybe, how to see themselves with a little more mercy. In the quiet moments of my own life, I've come to believe we're all standing in some kind of doorway, waiting for a reason to take the next step. Sometimes that reason is a song or a story or the sight of someone else moving without fear. And sometimes it's the presence of a person who believes you're capable even before you do. Like a lamp left glowing in a window, that kind of faith can guide you through the darkest stretch of road, even if you don't know exactly where it ends. So take a little time to sit with this story. Think about the faces in your own life, the ones who've stood quietly beside you, the ones you might have overlooked. And if this story touched you, consider passing that warmth along. There's someone out there in your own community, maybe in the Black community, maybe in a place you've never thought to look, waiting for a hand, a word, or a song to remind them they're more than what the world has decided they are. Sometimes that's all it takes to change everything.